Practice squad assemble. The Denver Broncos have put together their 17-man practice squad ahead of week one of the NFL regular season. Some surprises and some surprise departures on this list. We'll break it all down, including the Broncos' new addition, a potential gem at the tight end position. We'll break it all down here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country who tune in, making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked on Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure you subscribe or follow so you never miss out. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. And look, Broncos Country, here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show. It is practice squad season. The Broncos have gone through and they've assembled their 17-man practice squad. We'll tell you why it's 17 rather than 16 here in a little bit. Obviously, we talk about George Paton, his post-roster cut press conference. A lot of interesting gems from him on the state of this roster as the youth movement now moves forward here with Sean Payton. We'll also talk about some guys like Lil'Jordan Humphrey returning to the practice squad, and Denver going out there signing an AFC West divisional rival, a former player who has some upside but hasn't quite put it together on the field just yet. He's now a member of the Broncos. We'll break it all down here today on this show, which is also brought to you, our friends over there at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Sayre, my friend, Donald Parham, former Los Angeles Charger, a guy who has a lot of talent here. One of the key guys the Broncos have added to their practice squad here as they prepare for the Seattle Seahawks in week one.
Yeah, 6'8" target. I really like this move for the Denver Broncos, Cody. I do. Donald Parham is only 27 years old, just turned 27 on August 16th, had 4 touchdowns last season, 285 receiving yards. Both of those numbers were career bests for him, and he's got 11 career receiving touchdowns. So this is a guy that I think can really help you in the red zone area. And we know that Sean Payton absolutely loves the big, athletic, basketball-like tight ends, right? He's always had somebody like that on his roster. And I know that, the Broncos do have 3-4 tight ends that are going to be ahead of him on the depth chart at this point, but it can't hurt to bring a guy like this into the mix because he can be a factor in certain offensive packages. And we saw that with the Chargers over the last 4 years. In fact, Cody, I don't have the exact number offhand, but I know Parham has scored against the Broncos. I don't know how many times he did that, but he's definitely had some success against Denver throughout the course of his career. And you like seeing additions like this to the practice squad. You can keep up to 6 vested veterans on the practice squad. And I like that they picked this guy up. And as a matter of fact, Donald has not scored against the Broncos, but does have 9 catches on 11 targets for 147 total yards in his career against Denver. So it just feels like he scored against the Broncos for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's those 9 catches, but I like the pickup and I like taking a shot on the upside here.
Yeah, a little bit of a gem here potentially, right? And I think the biggest critique so far of Parham in his career, I know he's been a guy who has been battling injuries throughout his career. So now you get a little bit of intel on the enemy. Sean Payton bringing in an AFC West divisional rival who we don't know what the Chargers are going to look like just yet. With Harbaugh now leading the way there with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. But now you get some inside intel on maybe their offensive structure and how that looks and what they plan on doing this upcoming season. And then you maybe get a guy as the Broncos go throughout their tight end room right now, which features Greg Dulcich, Adam Troutman, Lucas Kroll, and Nate Adkins. In the event an injury happens, now you have, I think, a little bit of an insurance policy on a player who, as you mentioned, 6'8", good target radius there. And I think some deceptive athleticism for a guy who's 6'8". So something you want to continue to see maybe develop a little bit, maybe a couple of game day elevations here early on or throughout the season. Very curious to see what the vision is here for Parham. But, I mean, really, as it pertains to the practice squad, Parham was one addition to the Broncos 17-man practice squad, 17 because they have an NFL international player exemption for tight end Thomas Yasmin, who's from Australia. So Denver can carry 17 because really Yasmin doesn't really count against the roster limit at that point. So a nice little benefit to have in favor here of Denver. And look, some other surprises here for the Broncos on the practice squad, some key departures in terms of guys that you were maybe hoping to get back. Samaje Perine, who you weren't hoping to bring back onto the practice squad just in general. Denver released him. Well, he ends up signing to the active roster with the Kansas City Chiefs. No surprise there. You lose DeMontre Jacobs, who, the Broncos wanted to bring back onto the practice squad. The New England Patriots claimed him off of waivers. Veteran Sam Mustipher had an offer to come back to Denver. He chose to re-sign with the LA Chargers at this point. So maybe Parham and, Mustipher, a little bit of swap of intel between these two teams. And Elijah Garcia choosing to go to the New York Giants, a new opportunity. But then Denver losing two receivers to other teams. Brandon Johnson going to the Pittsburgh Steelers, reuniting with Russell Wilson and Zach Azzani, and Jalen Virgil getting an opportunity in Buffalo. So some surprises in terms of some guys that maybe Denver lost out on or didn't choose to bring back. But yeah, I mean, that's the nature of the game here when it comes to roster cuts and building out the practice squad.
Yeah, it really does crush the upside at the wide receiver position on the practice squad. I know the Broncos were able to bring back Lil'Jordan Humphrey, and we're going to break that down a little bit coming up in terms of guys that could be elevated soon to the active roster. But your upside on the practice squad, Cody, it takes a huge shot with guys like Brandon Johnson, Jalen Virgil going to other teams. Now you've got guys like Michael Bandy and David Sills. I know you and I both like David Sills, and we both kind of thought, man, maybe there's a chance that he could make the active roster. But he is a bit of an older guy to have on the practice squad. Not like he's 30 years old or anything, but he's older for a practice squad player. And so not getting back either of Jalen Virgil or Brandon Johnson, it does hurt the Denver Broncos, at least just a little bit there in the upside department. And you don't really love to see that, right? You want to see the Broncos be able to get as many guys as they possibly can back. But that wasn't the case. They had a lot of guys plucked away by other teams. We were just talking off camera. Art Green sounds like he's going to leave Denver as well and go somewhere else and play. And so there's just a lot of different names here to be looking at as far as guys who, okay, maybe the Broncos wanted these guys back on the practice squad, and maybe they were even planning on having a number of them back, but they just weren't able to make the right offer. Or, the way that you could look at this glass half full is the fact that the Broncos roster is deep enough to the point now that these players that, were great candidates for the practice squad, they don't want to come back because they don't see the clear path to the active roster. That was the reason why Jalen Virgil went to Buffalo instead of coming back to Denver. According to Chris Thomason, says that Jalen chose Buffalo because he felt like he had a better chance at getting onto their 53-man roster. And think about the difference between the perception of the Bills and the Broncos right now, right? I mean, the Bills, they're in a state of transition as well. They're not rebuilding necessarily, but for him to think he's got a better shot at their 53 than in Denver, it kind of does speak volumes to the work this team has done in reshaping the roster over the last year.
I think a lot of that has to do with Buffalo and their change at the wide receiver room specifically. I mean, they used to have Stephon Diggs. They used to have, a multitude of different guys contributing. Gabe Davis no longer there. And, now you got Keon Coleman, who's fun. We love Keon Coleman. We're not even Buffalo Bills fans or anything like that, but he's a feel-good guy in the NFL. Former Bronco KJ Hamler's on their practice squad, but Jalen has a chance to be a legitimate return option for them this upcoming season, and excited for him along the way here. But look, as the Broncos do fill out this practice squad here, one of the things we will mention is, okay, hey, when we look at this roster, who's got the best chance to develop? Who's got the best chance to be elevated week one? We share our picks on who we think that could be here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Want to get in shape but having trouble staying motivated? You need to make 5 Hour Energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost that you need to get fit. We all know sometimes we don't want to go to the gym, so take a 5 Hour Energy shot to give you that feeling and alertness to get you to the gym and get you to making your goals. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. And 5 Hour Energy's website has flavors galore: watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's flavors for everyone, and you can try them all. You can build your own 12-pack or 24-pack on the website and get those delivered right to your door. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today, you can use our promo code LOCKEDONFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today. Some familiar faces brought back to the practice squad will probably be elevated to the active roster against the Seattle Seahawks. Cody and I are going to talk to you exactly about why Lil'Jordan Humphrey and Michael Burton, they ain't going to be, on the back burner for too long here for the Denver Broncos, as well as some other notes on the practice squad additions this team made. We're going to talk all about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. And hey, thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where your boys, Cody and Sayre, are going to be here bringing you all the news, content coverage, analysis, and more that you want regarding your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, all season long. And for your second listen of the day, go check out Locked On Fantasy Football, because you need those updates. I know we all need the updates. You want to know who to pick up off waivers. You want to know maybe some of these deep dynasty plays who change teams, who could be in better situations for you. Go check out Locked On Fantasy Football after this. Cody, let's talk about Lil'Jordan Humphrey and Michael Burton as it pertains to what we've been hearing throughout this process of roster cuts, that these guys will probably be back on the active roster, not the 53-man roster, but the game day roster as practice squad elevations here pretty soon.
Yeah, and look, no surprise here. I think Denver really didn't want to risk on losing out on Nate Adkins potentially being claimed by another team, which, look, it's like, who do you know is going to get claimed? Like, for example, you look at offensive tackles. Well, with DeMontre Jacobs being claimed by New England, maybe Frank Crum would have been claimed there too. I think you can make the arguments as to who you think has the better upside there. We'll dive deep into what general manager George Paton had to say about Frank Crum a little bit later on here in today's show. But you look at Burton. What does he give you? He brings you veteran experience. He brings you consistency in terms of being a blocker at the fullback position, and he gives you special teams play as well. So while Nate Adkins has earned a job on the 53, and you have a guy like Michael Burton on the practice squad, there may be a situation where Nate Adkins is a game day inactive, whereas Michael Burton is elevated and active playing, and that could very well happen here in week one against the Seattle Seahawks. We know with Denver choosing to keep 5 wide receivers with Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims, Devon Vele, and Troy Franklin. You got 2 veteran guys, you got a second-year player, and you got 2 rookies. Now it's like Lil'Jordan Humphrey is going to be an elevation who probably will see a little bit more action, I think we can anticipate, than Troy Franklin this season. Keep in mind, these 2 veteran guys, like as the Broncos roster starts to shift in the next handful of weeks, right, there will be changes. There could be injuries that pop up. Michael Burton and Lil'Jordan Humphrey are 2 prime candidates to be elevated to the active roster if there is a player placed on injured reserve, so on and so forth, along those lines. Those will be the first 2 guys who probably have the priority there in terms of that. So I think that those guys have the most likely path to being elevated week one. I will throw in maybe a little bit of a wild card, and this kind of ties into our next portion here. Who do we think can best develop on the practice squad in terms of maybe a continue to develop, but also maybe a week one elevation? Dondrea Tillman, an outside linebacker. Denver brought him back onto the practice squad. I was going through and doing my film review for Mile High Sports, and I was looking at several plays, not only just on special teams, but also on defense. Tillman was a standout player, high motor. You certainly see it. He's a guy that I feel like has the best chance to develop on this practice squad, but also maybe get elevated week one as well.
Yeah, and he looks like that 5th edge for the Denver Broncos, Cody, as of right now, which is exciting for him coming off the stint that he had in the UFL, where he balled out for 3 straight seasons and earned an opportunity in Denver this year. I love that pickup for the Broncos. That's one of the best, I think, upside plays on the practice squad, as well as, Cody, man, we got to see Tyler Beatty come back to the practice squad. I think a lot of folks thought maybe he would get poached by running back needy teams. There were some people who thought he had done more than Blake Watson. I saw in the comments on yesterday's show, a number of people said, hey, what did Blake Watson do better than Tyler Beatty? And so a lot of people like Tyler Beatty. A lot of people were hoping to get him back, and the Broncos now do. I'm excited for him to be on the practice squad, and I think he's one of those guys that I think, he may not be getting elevated rather soon, because the Broncos do have 4 other backs on the 53-man roster, but he's one of those guys that it's exciting to have him around, because you could deploy him. We saw him return some kicks in the preseason as well. So that's an option. Reese Taylor had some really good plays throughout the preseason. I know you highlighted him in a number of your training camp notes, articles that you did over there at Mile High Sports, as well as kind of posting about him on Twitter, some nice PBUs, a couple of interceptions, things like that. Reese Taylor is kind of the quintessential practice squad player for the Broncos. Kind of reminds me of a similar situation to a guy like Jaquan McMillan, right? I mean, kind of stashed him away for a while, and then, you could see him. He might be the number 2 slot corner on this team. I mean, there are other guys on the 53 that'll probably slide in there if need be, but as far as the overall depth chart over the course of the summer, I felt like he was kind of the number 2 slot guy.
Yeah, and look, he did a great job against the run too. And doing my film review against the Cardinals, there were several times from the nickel position he came in and filled in against the run, got inside where, hey, you're running into where offensive linemen, defensive linemen are engaging, and you're coming up and you're making a tackle, a TFL, or a tackle 1 yard past the line of scrimmage. Like, he's not afraid of contact and physicality, and certainly he's had some up and down moments. I think in preseason games he stood out in practices. He's had some moments during some of the games. He's still in a position right now, I think, where he can continue to develop there and maybe emerge as a guy who can come in and play. Like, if something were to happen, ideally, if something were to happen to Jaquan McMillan in the nickel here in 2024 from an injury standpoint, my first thought would be that Riley Moss would probably slide in and play the nickel, or Levi Wallace at this point. And then maybe you get Damarri Mathis when he comes back off of IR. He's going to be out the first 4 weeks of the season. Or maybe you do see a little bit of an extended look here at your rookie cornerback in year 1 and Chris Abrams-Drain. Like, Denver is truly going with the youth movement here. And look, it's going to come with some risks, but I also think it comes with equal amounts of excitement and potential here, because this is something that Sean Payton and George Payton feel very strongly about with who they've assembled on their 53. But you have to obviously look at those developments there. I'm going to mention David Sills a little bit as a guy I'm continuing to be excited to see develop further on the practice squad. Like I said, he's not going to kill you with elite level speed, but maybe you talk about him running routes the right way that Johnny Morton likes his guys to run it. He hits his landmarks consistently. He can play special teams, I think, that, for the Broncos. But also, I think if there were an injury or two at the receiver position, he's the next guy really outside of Lil'Jordan Humphrey that is going to get called up. I think he gets called up before a guy like Michael Bandy, which no disrespect to Michael Bandy. I just think that Denver's looking for more at the receiver position. I think at least David Sills and Lil'Jordan Humphrey give the Broncos a little bit more right away in terms of size and also how they play the position. So David Sills is a name to watch. I think we will see him elevated a few times this season here. Potentially could see him elevated to the active roster at some point, as is the possibility with all of these guys that are here. And even some other young guys too. Like, we didn't bring it up, but former Broncos draft pick Matt Henningsen back on the practice squad here after being released and kind of pushed out by Jordan Jackson, and the emergence of him, Inyoma Uwazurike also getting that roster spot. So, Henningsen is still around in the mix, continues to develop there, but you like to see that. Tanner McAllister, a safety. I liked what I saw from him as well. And you can never have enough safety options here. I know you and I were talking about that yesterday after the 53, that, hey, like with Brandon Jones' injury, the thing that's going on there, like, you're concerned if there's an injury at that position, what your depth looks like. It's young, but you get a guy who plays with a high motor like McAllister. So really not a lot of big surprises here in the Broncos practice squad.
No, not a ton. And you kind of expect that, right? When you're going from a 90-man roster to 53, like, the teams around the league want to assemble their practice squads with mostly guys that have been around all summer, because you are likely going to call upon these guys at some point. I'm pretty sure, I don't know the exact percentage, but I would say at least 60 to 70% of these guys probably will end up playing some snaps for you throughout the course of a season, whether it's because of injury or you're calling a guy up on a given week. So these are important spots to be filled on the roster. And you certainly want guys on that practice squad who are familiar with the scheme, who are familiar with their teammates, things like that. But Cody, I know you're going to practice today. You're going to see probably a lot of different numbers on these guys out there. You're going to have to reorganize your brain in terms of what these guys are rocking now, because that's also a big change that we're going to see, I'm sure, coming up soon for the sickos like me that really care about the jersey numbers and the aesthetic of the NFL. But I'm excited about the practice squad players. And I think when you I know we're going to talk about George Paton and his comments coming up, but I was really excited listening to him talk. And it was interesting. The Broncos made him available without Sean Payton, which is typically the case. You typically see those two guys together at the podium, but this time was just George Paton up there. And he gave a lot of great insight about guys they were trying to bring back to the practice squad, guys they kept on the active roster versus the practice squad. Really, really interesting comments from George after roster cuts.
Yeah, Sean was a very, very busy man. He's like, George, take the media. I got to deal with them on Wednesday, and I got to talk to them on Thursday and Friday. Like, just the whole gamut of things here. Some great insight here from Broncos GM George Paton as Denver has assembled their practice squad. And speaking of that, George Paton touched a little bit further on Denver's youth movement and gave us some vision on some players there that we had some questions about, including Frank Crum. We'll break it all down here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, concerts, sports games. My favorite team, going to watch the Denver Broncos in person is so much better when you get to be around all the fans cheering on your favorite team. And we all have memories of seeing our favorite team or our favorite music artist do their thing on the field or stage. And we look forward to making those memories every year when we get the opportunity. And Game Time is making it far easier for you to make those memories. With their brand new feature, Game Time Picks, it makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier, filtering out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And they have a special Labor Day sale going on right now, 50% off Diamondbacks Dodgers. If you're in the area for that and you want to catch one of the last baseball games of the season, watch Shohei Ohtani play some ball. But what you do is you go to the Game Time app, you pick an upcoming live event that you're interested in, and you browse through different seats on Game Time Picks and check out all the different tiers of deals that they've got there. And my favorite feature of Game Time, you can check your seat that you want to maybe potentially buy a ticket for before the event even is purchased. So go to Game Time app and check out what they've got going on with all their deals, all the seat views, and the lowest price guarantee. Download the Game Time app and take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Create an account on the app and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of the show, Broncos Country, we want to say thank you, as always, for all the everydayers out there who make us their first listen. Thanks for making Locked On Broncos exactly what it is. Don't forget, if you're a brand new viewer or listener here of this show, make sure you subscribe or follow if you love the conversation so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team from an objective point of view. No hot takes, no clickbait, none of that craziness that you see clouding up your feeds and leading to wild discussion. We like to keep it real here. We like to break it all down here, Locked On Broncos. So with that said, Sayre, obviously we got to hear from George Paton following Denver's assemblation of the 53-man roster. Don't even know if either of those are words, but we're going to run with it.
I like them.
We heard from him and gave some great insight into maybe like the thought process as to why they decided to keep that. Now I'm starting to think as well, I have an idea when it comes to roster building. We'll see 5 wide receivers every year for the Broncos in terms of the 53. Seems like that's the sweet spot there for Sean Payton and George and how they want to assemble this roster. But some insight as to why they also kept 3 undrafted rookie free agents. And yeah, I felt like that was very interesting to hear George's thought process on the roster building aspect of it.
It really was, and he talked about the importance of the top 30 visits, and he talked about just the importance of the projection with all of these guys and how great it is for this team to be kind of collectively on board in terms of the scouting department, in terms of the coaches and the front office and things like that. And specifically to the point on Frank Crum, because I know a lot of people, I feel like he's been kind of one of the most polarizing guys. We've gotten a lot of mentions on Twitter, a lot of comments about Frank Crum. George Paton said you don't get many 6'7" guys or whatever he is that can bend like he does and has the power that he does. He's still raw. You see him in pass pro. He said, I know he got beat a couple of times, but for a kid who played at Wyoming and a first-year rookie in the NFL to do some of the things he did in practice versus Green Bay, he played well in Indy, obviously. I thought he played well most of the game. He had a few breakdowns, but really talented. I really love the upside of Crum. So you see kind of behind the scenes look of they're not denying, like, yeah, he had the struggles in the preseason that you all saw, right? But here's the other things that we do see from him, and we believe that we can build on these traits with him. And the Broncos obviously had a draftable grade on Frank Crum, Cody, because they paid him like a 6th-round pick. So I think they definitely liked him a lot. And the same is true of guys like Lavelle Bailey, Blake Watson. You bring these guys in for visits, you get to know them as people and how they fit into your culture as a team. It's not just keeping undrafted players for the sake of keeping alive tradition, but it's keeping guys around that you see the traits unfolding on the practice field and in games and things that you want to buy into for the future.
Well, and so much of that you could attribute to, obviously, you mentioned Lavelle Bailey, Blake Watson at running back. We'll see what the long-term vision is there. You want, and I get it, like, you have to be smart with some of the guys, because Sean Payton has always said, we don't want players that we really, really like, that we think can be good, to go elsewhere when we had them here in the building. And look, I think you can look at Jalen Virgil, you can look at Brandon Johnson, say like, well, what happened in that situation? I think at one point you have to evaluate where your bigger needs are on the roster. I think you and I agree they should have kept more wide receivers, but the team clearly disagreed with us, and that's okay. And but I think when you look at Denver and in terms of how they continue to build this roster, I think that's a great example there, especially with Crum. Is he going to be the jumbo package guy now? And like, did Quinn Bailey's injury change everything in terms of how Denver was maybe going to approach building this roster? I think that has something to do with it, partially due to the fact of Bailey's injury. So now will we see Frank Crum as that jumbo guy? Will it be Alex Palczewski? Will it be Matt Parrott? I don't know who it's going to be, but that's going to be a big part of this offense here with Denver, especially as they look to run the football, which, you know, George Payton also touched on Javonte Williams and how he looks like he's getting back to his rookie form. Seeing Javonte, I'll say this, when I was looking at Javonte during OTAs, like at the beginning of OTAs, I was like, Javonte just doesn't look right. Well, I don't think Javonte was going where he was, to my understanding, I think he was wearing something underneath his pads, like one of those heavyweight I don't know, vests to weigh you down a little bit, a weight vest. And then that was in the process. Then he comes back looking unbelievable for training camp. It's like, okay, there was a method to the madness there. We can't invest into what he looked like in OTAs, but man, he looked good at training camp, and he's going to be the primary guy here. So I like that, but I also felt it was interesting because I think you and I, we kind of disagreed on like keeping 3 quarterbacks. I thought you made some great arguments as to why you do it. For me, I felt like, okay, hey, you might have bigger needs at other positions that maybe impact the numbers of it. But it seems like George Payton is looking at Jarrett Stidham and obviously Zach Wilson is like, hey, like, we value these guys in the quarterback room. And specifically, he went in a little bit deeper on Zach Wilson as to what they like about him, which kind of gives me, belief in your theory that, hey, one of these guys could be traded by the trade deadline, considering what happens around the NFL at the quarterback position.
Yeah, George Payton and the Broncos are obviously very high on Zach Wilson. We've heard Sean Payton a number of times throughout the summer say really nice things about him. He called him very early in the offseason. He was asked who's the most hated, unfairly hated quarterback in the league, and the first name that he popped off was Zach Wilson. And now we know kind of what George Payton really feels about him, because he was asked, like, do you think he has the skill set to become a starter again in the NFL at some point? And George's comments, like, listen to these comments. I'm going to quote him verbatim here because it's worth noting. He said, no doubt, he has starter tools all over. It's been pretty cool just watching him with really no expectations. He can just go out there and play football. He has all the traits. He has all the starting traits in the world. He's still working through some things. You can see the good and the really good last week in the game. He can throw it as good as anyone in the league. I mentioned before, he's smart and he's a great kid. He has starter traits all over. I do think he will be a starter in the league. So whether or not you think that's lip service by the general manager, just like Sean Payton's stuff was just lip service, if that's what you're calling it, I think, Cody, I do believe the Broncos really buy what Zach Wilson has as far as the traits. He's still very young, and we saw the arm talent against the Cardinals. I mean, call it what you want against third-string players. I don't care. The arm talent and the athleticism were on display in full force. I agree with George. I think Zach will be a starter again in the NFL, and I believe the Broncos will get him to be making those millions, like Sean Payton said, is their job to do.
Or there's a good chance he stays on as the backup, makes a couple $1 million in 2025 behind Bo Nix. Like, there is a path where that becomes a little bit more of a likely reality here as we go on, and very curious to see how it all plays out the rest of the way here. But look, Broncos country, Denver is truly embracing the youth movement. Does that mean that they're going to win a lot of games in 2024? No, but it doesn't mean that they won't win a lot of games either. The Broncos right now are relatively unknown, and I think that they're okay with that. Sean Payton has said that there's something fun about a young, dangerous team. Will they be just that? Well, Seattle week 1 is coming up here in just about a week and a half, and we'll have you covered every step of the way, including beginning next week. Crossover Thursdays returns. Sayre will sit down with Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks. They'll break down the big matchup here in week 1. Denver will face a tough wide receiving core. But until then, the Broncos are going to have some practice. They're set to break ground on the new team facility. We'll have updates for you and much more throughout the week here and the coming episodes here. Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, we'll see you then for your second listen. Go check out Locked On Fantasy Football so you can win your leagues this upcoming season.